Santa Clarita is Southern California's entertainment destination. Just minutes from LA, Santa Clarita's year-round weather means you can enjoy year-round fun. Like thrilling coasters and water parks, premium shopping, destination day spas, fine dining, outdoor adventure, and major events such as wine festivals, golf tournaments, and the Cowboy Festival. Santa Clarita, always in season.
Okay, we have two speakers speaking in opposition. First up, Lynn Plembach, representing Scope.
I too have some concerns about the simulations, only not the simulations, the photographs they decide to take of the oak trees. First of all, I hope you all realize that they're removing every oak on site. There's only 10 oaks on site, actually 9 on site and 1 off site, and they're going to take the 1 off site too. They are all on the knoll, and the knoll is being graded down to fill, so why can't they get the fill from someplace else? Also, one of the oaks is 97 inches in circumference. That's just 8 inches short of being heritage. So although they say there's 10 oaks and none of them are heritage, some of them are pretty big oaks. And of course, a heritage oak we'll never see again in several generations. So planting it with 24-inch box trees is not going to solve the problem. And I just wanted to read to you the section from Jan Scow's Oak Report. It says, the project has the potential to conflict with local ordinance that preserves oak trees because there are 10 non-heritage oak trees located on the project site. Due to the amount of grading involved, all 10 trees will need to be removed. The City of Santa Clarita's oak tree ordinance is the only local policy or ordinance that protects the environmental resources in the city. The ordinance establishes regulatory measures that mandate the manner in which oak trees may be removed, pruned, or cut, or otherwise. So I think when they don't submit any other alternative or even look at alternatives or say they examine another alternative and tell you why they can't do it, and the oaks are going away because of grading, I don't think that's legitimate. And I think you need to ask more questions. And the other issue that I have is analysis of public noticing. It says public hearing notice appeared in the Signal on May 29th. I would just like to call to all of your attention that it's May 20th today. And then project site was posted with a sign on May 5th. Aren't we required to post them for 30 days? So I don't think this was properly noticed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Plembach. Next up, we have Larry Bird. Good evening, Larry.
Commissioners, I'm a 30-year resident of Newhall, and I'm glad to see this project. I'm supporting the staff's recommendations tonight. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks for coming out tonight. Mr. Lambert.
Good evening, Planet Commissioners. Jeff Lambert again. I actually wanted to just take this opportunity in rebuttal to make one more point, or a couple more points that I didn't make earlier. One is part of the way that, one of the constraints that really drove this project is the fact that it's a piece of a larger quadrant. The overall quadrant of Newhall Avenue and Sierra Highway, this sort of northeast corner of that intersection. We've been talking to staff a lot during this process of how to develop our piece to make sure that the development of our piece allows for the overall development of that quadrant that's in an integrated way. And part of the reason that no comes down to allow our development, it makes the connection between our piece of property and the piece directly south of us along Newhall Avenue, that makes the ability for those two properties to ultimately look like they were integrated together. If we try to maintain that knoll and maintain the existing topography, we can't do that. And we thought it was important, and I think the city pushed us that way to make sure that whatever we do on our piece, just because we're first, we don't want to preclude the really integrated development of the gateway into Newhall, and that was a big driver to the way the site plan currently looks. Another constraint that's been, I think I failed to mention earlier, is the oil wells. Even though they're properly capped, there are state restrictions to make sure buildings can't sit on top of those oil wells. So we had to work around those, and that's another one of the constraints that made the development of the site quite challenging. I think really I just want to reiterate, we were faced with multiple goals of the city and expectations of what the city's development wanted to be on the site, and we think we balanced those goals as best we could to come up with a project that develops jobs, provides a great visual architectural gateway to downtown Newhall, and really hopefully starts to reinvigorate this corridor of the city. I also want to reiterate we have exceeded, as your oak tree specialist told you, our oak tree mitigation obligation. We are putting in significant oak trees to make a strong statement that we understand the importance of oaks and native materials on this site, and we intend to maintain those. If it's the Commission's desire that those larger trees that might need more than 2 years maintenance is something you want to require of us, I'll tell you now we'll accept that requirement to do that. And then finally, I can bring our engineer up if you want, but what I'm told by our civil engineer is the reconfiguration of the topography of this site does not change or in any way the impacts from drainage to the adjacent mobile home park on the other side of Sierra Highway. But if you need more explanation, I'm happy to bring Ron up. That's helpful.
What was his name, Mr.
Ron
Lambert?
Coaster.
Okay, I'll ask.
We don't have a slip for him, but if he speaks, we'll get one filled out for you.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert. Mr. Kennedy, Commissioner Kennedy, would like to hear the...
That's what I want to hear, yes.
Yeah,
Mr.
the
Watershed.
geologist.
I'd appreciate that, yes.
We'll have him fill out a card after. If you can, just state your name and where you're located.
Ron Coaster, civil engineer, CRC Enterprises, here in beautiful Santa Clarita.
Welcome.
Well, commissioners, the issue that you wanted to discuss was the runoff, if I understand what you're asking for at this moment. Basically, what we have is we have a concern that the runoff that comes from another area, which was shown up here on the board earlier as the Whitney Canyon area, comes through Caltrans drainage devices that are located in Sierra Highway. That drainage comes through of no concern for us. It has its upstream debris basins, upstream issues are resolved off of our property. The water's conveyed down and passed past our property. The site itself will deal with any type of additional volumes of water based what we call a delta Q, meaning what's leaving our particular site today will not be increased. When that water leaves our site, the same amount or volume of water will leave our property. That is the address that we'll provide on that. So downstream concerns, there will be none.
No delta Q, but what about direction of the flow? Does the direction change at all?
No, sir. It's going to the same places before as it is now.
I've got one before you take off.
Yes, sir.
I guess I'd have to ask, how do you accomplish that? If we're going to take this piece of property that's currently dirt and
Yes, sir.
put a building on it, how do we ensure that we have the same amount of water moving down the pipe?
Well, we basically go through the project in its current condition and we determine what today's volume of water is. We then look at the project after we've developed it and we say there is an additional amount of volume. That difference, the delta Q, will be retained on site. And in this case, as you've seen, there's no physical place to place it. There won't be any retention basins or things of that nature, so it'll be underground detention. Basically, the storage facilities will be some type of a box structure or a pipe structure that'll be sitting under the parking lot where that delta Q will be stored, and after the peak storm goes past, that water will be meted out.
Okay. That's great, thanks.
You're welcome, sir.
Commissioner Troutman, do you have any questions? Mr. Coaster?
No, I don't. Thank you.
All right.
Coaster, thanks for coming up and
You're
speaking.
very welcome. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Before we go any further, after the public hearing and Mr. Lambert rebutted, we actually had somebody else that would like to speak. Say what? Oh, it's a written comment card? I'm sorry. It used to be a different color. Did you want to talk? Or I can just read what you said. Okay, come on up. This is Dallas Ziegler. Welcome, Ms. Ziegler.
I just actually found out about all this yesterday. And I went up to the site this morning, and it was just lovely. It's gorgeous. I'm a history student and getting my degree at COC, and I'm studying Lincoln right now. And as you probably know, Lincoln, in his address and in his whole point, was to have slavery not spread. He couldn't do anything about what was already existing, but he did not want slavery spread. So I say that along with Joni Mitchell's song that says, we paved paradise and put up a parking lot. And it seems to me that that's what's happening here. And as I put on the card, the height of these buildings seems to be conflicting with what code is what I understand. Sorry. And I worked at the Santa Clarita Athletic Club, and I know that they required them that the sign be taken down there. So I strongly oppose this, not only for the height, but because of the landscape and not extending its commercial area in this particular area because of the corridor that is free and open and has been the tradition along the highway for many, many, many years. And even though we can't stop what happened, for instance, the Kohl's and the Target lot, that the mall that's there, we can stop this. And it would be a travesty, and especially, like I said, the code that should not be over 35 feet. And this is proposed for far well exceeding that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Ziegler. Mr. Lambert, did you want to respond to that?
I guess my sense is your staff will probably do some response, but two comments I'd make is the property is zoned commercial, and it has been zoned commercial since the city adopted its zoning code, and probably before that by the county. So it's always been intended to be commercial. I think part of why it wasn't developed is because of all the challenges we're dealing with. It is something that the city's identified as a gateway into downtown Newhall for development to try to spur the growth in downtown Newhall, inconsistent with your plan. I think the other piece is there is no height limit. It requires a site-by-site review if you go over 35 feet, and that's why we're before the commission this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert. Yes.
May I, Jeff, sorry, before you sit down. So getting back to what Commissioner Ostrom was talking about in the beginning about oak trees and what was said about preserving the knoll and redesigning, since this is a planned development overlay, and according to our UDC, that calls for creative and imaginative designs that provide a higher level of amenities and preservation of natural and scenic qualities of open spaces. So if this were, if preservation or if taking out the knoll is in part because the city is asking for this as part of Gateway, let's say the knoll is retained and some of the trees are retained, can you build, say, 70 or 80% of what you want to build on the remaining property?
The biggest building that impacts the oaks is the larger building, number 4. If you look at the oak tree overlay that's in your, I think in the PowerPoint presentation, and Ben might bring it up on the screen. Yeah, if you see, most of the oaks that are in the impact zone are associated with that building. That building is obviously the larger of the 4 buildings we're proposing. We could look at sliding that building closer to the 14 freeway, but that's the area that would allow our site to integrate with the site to the south, because that's where those two pieces of property come together. And a building in that location would make that integration harder, if not impossible to do. Okay, explain. What's on that other property that... Well, that's the height of the knoll. Mm-hmm. And I think when I talked about the quadrant issue earlier, the quadrant is everything sort of south of us. We don't actually we don't reach Newhall Avenue. There's other intervening properties in there. And we designed the site in order to sort of leave that piece alone so that we could, in the future, integrate our site with the site next door so that we had an integrated quadrant development. And so moving the building there was not an option. We did look at it. It basically limited our ability to develop this quadrant consistent sort of integrated plan. We could add I suppose, square footage to each of the 3 smaller buildings, but their footprints don't really make that extra height work. They become pretty inefficient buildings from a inside floor area perspective. They're not big floor footprints to begin with. So adding square footage, you take up so much space in vertical connections that you undermine that additional square footage.
So could you not just make that the larger building on that other pad and put maybe one smaller building up?
We looked at that as well. The northern piece of the site, as you can see, is much more narrow. And to put a larger footprint up there, we couldn't provide the parking around the building that those buyers of those condos would demand. The parking has to be accessible to the front door. And that if you take that footprint and slide it north, there's not enough room to have parking around the building to make that building usable. I think that we have looked at all of these issues trying to save the Oaks and try to work around them. We weren't able to do that given the other constraints. So our approach was to over-mitigate for the impact, to not just do the minimum, but significantly exceed the requirements in order to make that happen. But we did look at all the constraints, and we also have oil wells that have limited where the building footprints can be as well.
And tell me what is the midpoint density here? You're asking to exceed, because I'm still trying to figure this out from the 91,000 square feet of commercial space and the calculation for the floor area ratio was based on like 111,000 square feet.
Yeah, I can answer that. The midpoint floor area ratio is 0.375. The maximum allowed with a conditional use permit would be 0.5. So the calculation that you're looking at is based on that maximum 0.5 FAR for the project site. Well, no, the 111.
Okay.
But then because this is a hillside parcel, it's subject to a hillside reduction per the hillside ordinance. And that, actually, it's that reduction, which is the 111,000. The applicant is actually only proposing essentially 91,000.
So they're not asking for 0.5, are they?
No, they're not asking all the way, they're not asking for the absolute maximum.
But it's above the...
It's above the 0.375.
Okay. And so there isn't a way, without saying let's save all the oak trees, there isn't a way to save part of them. I mean, I see some of them are in the parking areas, the parking lot. Okay, it looks...
They're in the parking lot, but that's the location of the knoll. So we determined that you can't partially lower the knoll. You have to sort of move it all, and so we couldn't work around those. I think one of our constraints is we understand the commission generally is sensitive to height, and we could have created smaller, taller buildings and avoided the oaks, but we didn't think that was in the goals of the commission to have those kinds of structures there. So we tried to be more sensitive.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Lambert, you're telling me that you could have made this project work financially by just eliminating the 4th building on that hill and having high-rise buildings, 2 or 3 or 4 high-rise buildings in the narrow, and getting your parking in?
No.
You just said to us that if we had, you know that we are opposed to sky-rise buildings.
Right.
And you said that we could have put them down there if we wanted to move them down there. But to me, Jeff, I don't want to say anything that you didn't say, but if it's my understanding that you need that dirt from that knoll, that knoll is going to be where the underground parking is. This project wouldn't work. I don't think. Would this project have worked any other way?
We tried every other way. We couldn't get another project to work on this site.
Okay, so it wouldn't work on site. So what we're saying is that knoll has to be gone. You couldn't have changed it. You couldn't have added anything down further or anything like that.
Yeah, the knoll needed to move, one, because we were using the dirt on site to minimize off-site activity to fill the hole.
Right.
It needed to move again down because that would allow us to have the potential to connect the adjacent property to the south. We had to reduce the knoll again so that the buildings that we're creating have a relationship to Sierra Highway and aren't up above Sierra Highway so far that they didn't connect to the street. And that was all being done with the other constraints that we had to deal with, which are the odd shape, the oil wells, and the other things we've talked about. That's what I meant to say if I didn't say that.
Okay, I'm still trying to get clarification. Lisa, you had mentioned that the dirt on site was coming from the knoll. So the other consideration about the knoll is that you need to be able to develop on that property because of the wells, the oil wells.
I mean, I guess there's a whole bunch of constraints that we're dealing with. One of them is the knoll and all the things I just tried to mention. Then there's the oil wells. Then there's trying to sort of create the square footage that makes this a gateway for the city, and also doesn't have heights that are too much further than we have proposed as far as this location. Were all part of the constraints that we had to deal with.
Okay, but if, let's say you've got those smaller buildings, let's say you combine those in one building and you add a floor or two, all right, and then maybe you add another floor, and you don't have everything perfectly at street level, perhaps, and maybe, I don't know, maybe you have some underground parking or something. I'm just trying to look at this and see if there's some way to preserve any part of that, because it seems to me gateway to this area is not just about the buildings and the employment and all of that, and I think that the gateway to an area that's known for oaks and for more of a rural feel, and we talk about this in terms of master beautification plan and what each area sort of stands for, that part of that gateway is that knoll with those trees.
But there was a statement earlier that in order for that knoll, or in order for that development to articulate well with the balance of the intersection, the corner, you had to lower that knoll.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think if that wasn't the case, we'd like to see the knoll left there and maybe import soil. But I think the planning requirement, or the planning desire, or for the welfare of that intersection, for it to be financially solvent or to work, that knoll should come down to match the property on the other side of the street.
Just by way of fairness to the applicant, in terms of responding to some of the questions, we've probably put this applicant through more machinations in terms of the design of this site than we've put many applicants through. And that was for a combination of reasons. One of which was that we were looking at the entire quadrant, and we wanted to make sure that when that area developed, it could develop in an integrated manner. And so we actually asked this applicant to look at property outside of that which he owned, look at the additional property, and develop site design concepts that would allow for the integration of the parcels themselves. That property that's adjacent is actually owned in part by USC, and we would have loved to have seen one single integrated design. In fact, we pushed very hard for them to acquire the property, but they were unsuccessful in their negotiations with USC to acquire that. So part of the effort in terms of the design was to accommodate requirements from the city to come up with that integrated plan for that site. The USC property is constrained in and of itself and will be difficult to develop because of its limited access onto Newhall Avenue between Sierra Highway and the freeway on-ramps and off-ramps themselves. And so we have some concern about the traffic flow and the traffic access on that. The number of constraints on the site were very significant. There were the oil well constraints, there's the length and narrowness of parts of the sites, there's the grading constraints, the fill that was necessary to address the pit that exists on that site, and so on. So our push was to ask the applicant to take into consideration the fact that this is a gateway, to take into consideration the integration between the sites, to take into consideration that we are looking at trying to produce employment opportunities within the city. We are a housing-rich and jobs-poor environment today. A significant number of our residents commute down the 5 and the 14 and spend a lot of time sitting in that traffic, burning up a lot of gasoline in the process. And so any opportunity that we find that we can produce jobs and allow people to live and work in the same community, we think adds to sustainability, reduces energy consumption, is a positive for the environment as opposed to a negative to the environment. In the OVOV, One Valley, One Vision planning effort, we are putting that plan through a very strenuous test in terms of jobs housing balance, in terms of circulation element, and in terms of water supply. And frankly, meeting the jobs housing balance is proving to be a serious challenge. We find that we are looking at trying to identify those parcels that can accommodate development and provide the jobs opportunity, while at the same time really aggressively pushing the creation of the green belt around the city, creating the buffers around the city where we don't allow significant or any development to occur, because we're trying to create a character and protect as much open space in the areas surrounding the city and the Santa Clarita Valley as absolutely possible. So we put this applicant through a lot of hoops and hurdles in this process, and frankly, our feeling is that he has gone out of his way to try and respond to the requirements that we were imposing on him with this project.
Thank you, Mr. Brockman. Any questions or discussion of?
I have a couple more questions. Asked about the mitigation. Landscaping is 23%?
Correct.
Okay, and that's across the board on the property?
That's the gross.
Gross for the, okay.
Correct.
The mitigation measures that are on handwritten pages 109 through 113 are not, I didn't see them matching up with conditions of approval. Are they in there, or can we include them by reference? I think there's information in there.
Well, there's simply the mitigation measures that have to be done.
But are they mentioned in? Are they referenced in the conditions of approval so that they're included?
The mitigation measures aren't typically identified as conditions of approval. You have your conditions of approval, that's one set of requirements for development, and then you have your mitigation measures typically associated with the environmental document.
Because I thought, we've seen things about tree maintenance and that sort of thing in conditions of approval.
Well, I think we have, I think we have standard
some
conditions
of them are there
of
and some of them are not.
Right. We have.
All right. All right, well, I think I've asked all the questions, but I just want to say that we do continue to stress that we want to see oak tree preservation, and we want to see unique designs. And in this area, I'm kind of confused about, and I understand the applicant has done a lot of their homework. We heard a lot more from Jeff than I understood to be the case, so that was very good. But in a planned development overlay where you're supposed to have something unique, that we're not really so unique, it's just leveling things out. So and one of the things that I hear frequently in these applications is that this area or that area has seen previous damage, so, this is an improvement, anything's an improvement, and sometimes I'd like to hear that we're going to do something really unique and take it beyond what it could be just to be brought up to average. So those are my comments at this point.
On comments, I'd just like to say that before the meeting started, I was talking to Lisa, and I said to her, my issues are the oak trees. I said, we discussed it. Tonight I got good clarification from Mr. Lambert that obviously they couldn't put this project together unless they removed those trees. I think the project, when I came here after doing my homework, I think the project's a tremendous project for that area. We had talked about this development for a long time. I love what they put together architecturally. Interesting things that were important was the traffic, and we saw that they're restriping the traffic. They're having special turning lanes. So I really think that they've done a tremendous job with this piece of property. It's important that I believe staff has done a tremendous job on trying to put a product that is going to be beautiful, so when people are driving from Lancaster down into LA, they'll look over there and they'll see this beautiful project. So I think it's a good project. I don't like to knock 10 trees out. The mitigation of bringing in a lot more oak trees, or 7 oak trees, I can live with. I think it'd just be an overall good project for this piece of land.
I'll just echo what you said, Mike. I think it's and yes, the statement's been made many times, but this is a particularly heavily impacted piece of property, and the fact that it's being developed at all, I guess, says a lot to what the value of property has increased to over the years, because I would have never thought that a project would have ever penciled out, knowing all the things that we've been told over the years impact that whole area, that whole intersection area. So I agree with you. I think net, the community is going to get a pretty substantial improvement down there with this project, and hopefully it will spur additional additional development that meets this kind of a standard.
Commissioner Kennedy.
Yeah, all the times I've driven past that site and looked at it, I've often wondered, what can we do with this property? Something needs to be done here. And I think I'm really impressed with this project that's proposed tonight. I like the architecture. I like some of the features that have gone into it, such as concealing the HVAC units from the ceilings, underneath the roof, et cetera, et cetera. But I think on the oak tree thing, we can, in the long run, actually benefit from this trade-off that we're getting here from the mitigations. But I also am very sensitive to my fellow commissioners' concerns. I know at least Commissioner Troutman had a concern about the length of monitoring and whatnot, and I just wonder if there isn't some way to work around that. And one thing that I would propose, for example, is that the monitoring that we put in here as a condition of approval, the monitoring of the scrub oak replacements, that would be trees 487, 488, 489, and 490. It's going to be replaced by 11 scrub oaks. That monitoring be 3-year period. But for all the others, which are 28 inches in diameter or greater, that we would monitor them for 5 years. Because I know, at least it's always been my impression when I read that the expectation is that in 5 years we'll have 50% coverage of the canopy over the parking lot or whatnot from a given oak tree, that there's an implication there at least that that tree will still be in existence 5 years hence. And the only way we can know for sure is if we monitor it. So I would set forth that I'm ready to vote in favor of this with the proviso that we put those conditions of approval.
Thank you, Commissioner Kennedy. Commissioner Ostrom?
Yeah, I agree with my fellow commissioners. This is a very challenging piece of property. I used to know one of the owners of the property. It's an extremely difficult property, and one of the reasons why I wanted to chase after the issues because I would think that anybody that saw the paper trail that we were leaving before we started the discussion would really not understand the complexity of it, and I really wanted to bring that out. I learned something in bringing it out, some of the strategy, which just only testifies to the far more complex thinking that the staff gives to it than even I give to it. So The one thing that we haven't really discussed was brought up by Mr. Lambert is he's willing to put larger trees on it than what's required. And I wanted to ask our arborist could I have the arborist up here for a second?
I don't think I heard that. I think he said he would watch them longer and evaluate them. I don't think he said he's going to.
No, I understood. Lambert, didn't you indicate that? But I wanted to ask our arborist something. Is there really a trade-off to getting like the next size up? Do things grow? For instance, if you get a 50-inch box as opposed to a 40-inch box, will the 40-inch box be a 50-inch box in 2 years, or is there some wise old guy told me one time that the best tree is a native tree. And is there some kind of a trade-off here?
If I may answer, the applicant is already doing that with the replacement or the planting of the specimen-sized trees. And let it be known that specimen-sized trees begin at 72-inch box. Once you get into that 72-inch box, 84-inch, 96, 108, and so on, those are specimen-sized trees that are usually taken from another site, preserved at a nursery or a growing grounds from a tree relocating company. Your standard nurseries will normally carry 60-inch box trees on down, which are your 48s, your 36s, and your 24s. What the applicant is proposing to do is to plant, if I'm not mistaken, it was an 84-inch box tree and several 72-inch box trees, and I believe one 60-inch box tree, all which are specimen-sized trees. And mind you that it's also very difficult to find the locations for these because an 84-inch box tree requires probably about a 110-inch digging pit and depth and cranes and everything else to put those trees in. Not to mention the significant cost, which I think may have been a question up here earlier. An 84-inch box tree can range anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000 depending upon the species of tree. So it goes back to the mitigation where the applicant has or is doing that.
Yeah, well, what exactly was it that you said, Jeff? Because you sort of said something offhanded, and I said, did you really say that? Or
like I got in trouble already tonight for saying the wrong thing, so I mean, be careful. I think what I suggested when the comment came about the 2 or 3 year maintenance period, that we would be happy if the commission wanted those larger trees to have a longer period of time, that we would do that.
But you stopped when you said you stopped the sentence at one of the larger trees, then you sat down.
I must have walked away from the microphone at that point. I apologize.
Okay.
So, Mr. Lambert, can I ask, are you willing to accept the
Yes.
request? Okay, and then I had one other question. I noticed in here in the staff report that there was discussion about possible medical office buildings, clinic, that sort of thing. So is that definitely something that's being discussed? I know you can't say for certain that it's...
We've parked the project, we've over-parked the project to allow some of the spaces to be medical. And that's the extent of the analysis we've done so far. We wanted to make sure we had that available to us.
Okay, well, I appreciate that because we've been discussing needs for more medical office space here too.
Yes.
All right, thanks.
Ms. Lambert. Okay, what is the pleasure of the commission?
I move for approval of the proposal as submitted by staff with the amendment that we would add a condition of approval, perhaps PL 25 or wherever it fits, wherever staff feels it fits in appropriately, that requires that there will be a 5-year monitoring period for all oak trees that are removed that are not identified as scrub oaks on the site.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor.
Second.
We have a second. Can we please have a roll call?
Commissioner Kennedy?
Yes.
Commissioner Burkhart?
Yes.
Commissioner Ostrom?
Yes.
Commissioner Troutman?
Yes.
Chair Berger?
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you.
You. Mr. Jarvis, you had a busy night. Thank you very much.
I'm going to go home and go to bed.
So are we. Okay. We do have Lynn Plembach. Did she go home? Did she go home?
Yes.
She's not outside there? Craig? No? Okay. Well, she did want to speak on something, but she's obviously not here, so sorry about that. Okay, at this time, we bring up our planning manager's report, Mrs. Lisa Weber.
Good evening, Chair Berger. Thank you. Very quick report for you tonight. At last week's City Council meeting, we had 2 planning-related items go before the City Council. We had the second reading of the Hasley Hills annexation pre-zone item. That was passed, and therefore we are proceeding with the application to LAFCO for their consideration on the Hasley Hills annexation project. Also, the appeal of the Planning Commission's approval of the Mandalay Road single-family residence with detached garage that's located in the Sand Canyon community. That was heard by the City Council, and the City Council did decide to uphold the Planning Commission's approval of that project. Also, if you remember on your agenda, a continued item, the Market Street telecommunications facility. That was coming back to you in June, and that project has been withdrawn completely, so the Planning Commission will not be hearing that item. Also, SunCal Cherokee team who are involved with the Whitaker Burmite property submitted an application for the Midtown project. That's the new name for the project. If you remember, there is an existing specific plan that still runs with that land with the development agreement, and that's called the Portobello Specific Plan. So the Midtown project, once approved, and it will likely take years to go through this process, will supersede that specific plan. But the project is very preliminary. They submitted an application to get in the city system. They submitted a press release. There was a few articles in the newspaper last week about their submittal. They intend to do extensive community outreach, possible open houses with site tours, to really engage the community and see what types of land uses are appropriate for that property. City staff has been having some preliminary conversations with the applicant team, expressing to them some of our ideas for the land use and infrastructure plan. So stay tuned. That will be an exciting project, and it will be extensive and before the Planning Commission probably sometime either next year or the year following.
Excellent. Okay, Planning Commissioners report. Commissioner Troutman.
Last night we had an Arts Advisory Committee meeting. We usually have them on the 4th Monday, but because next Monday's a holiday, we had it last night. And we didn't quite have a quorum. We've had a little trouble with that, but we have some terms that are coming up and some new people will be coming on. And we're excited about the prospects of moving ahead with the arts. Mayor Keller has spoken about potentially an arts commission, and we've been talking about kickstarting the cultural arts master plan. And given the constraints of the budget, we are probably going to become more of a working committee and see if we can't get things moving along on our own.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Troutman. Commissioner Ostrom. Commissioner Burkhart. Commissioner Kennedy.
As I report on the 7th of May, I was pleased to participate in a workforce housing symposium put on by the Valley Industrial Association, whereby a group of local citizens and leaders got together to talk about the feasibility of setting up organizations here in Santa Clarita that could help us with finding resources and developing a process for getting housing into the city. Also on Wednesday the 14th, I had the privilege of speaking before the Sunrise Rotary Club to talk about the planning process here in Santa Clarita and help tell them what we do on this commission. So,
thank you very much. Okay, we don't have any other business from the floor that I don't see anybody else has turned in an application. With that, Lisa, will you do us a favor? Just walk up to we have something for you. We want to give you a little something. We want to recognize you. I know you don't like this, but what? No, I just want you to. We just want to say congratulations on your marriage. This is from the commission, and we just want to thank you for everything you do for us. Congratulations.
Yay. Mrs. Weber.
With that, I'll open a...
Move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Good night.
Yes, I know I'm late. I'll be there soon.
It's better to lose 1 minute of your life than your life in 1 minute. Watch the road.
Before big rig trucks, freight came through the Newhall Pass by train, horse, and mule. But what's the deal with the camels? The Civil War was several years off, and the U.S. Army wanted a way to carry supplies west from Texas. Horses and mules couldn't handle the rigors of the desert, and Jefferson Davis, Secretary of War, believed the rugged beasts of Arabia were just the ticket. Camels came over from the Middle East, and so was born the United States Camel Corps. The animals did a fine job, but they spooked the horses and spit at the soldiers. The grand experiment was headed for the scrap heap of history, but not before Edward Beale, a veteran of the Mexican-American War, led a caravan of 25 camels, 44 soldiers, and 2 camel jockeys across the Arizona desert, stopping first at Los Angeles, then up through the Newhall Pass and on to Fort Tejon at the top of the Grapevine. War was brewing now, and there were more important things for the Army to do than worry about some ornery camels. The beasts were forgotten, but not by Beale, who still hauled supplies back and forth from Tejon to L.A. on camelback right through the Santa Clarita Valley. Beale ended up letting the camels roam free on his land up the Grapevine. Camel sightings were reported in the Tehachapis and the banks of the Santa Clara River for years. Want to learn more about Santa Clarita Valley history? Click on scvhistory.com or stop by the Saugus train station in downtown Newhall weekends 1 to 4.